Okay. Hi, my name's Bernie, and I'm an addict.
Hi, Bernie.
And when I got here yesterday and saw the list, there was the two that hit me the quickest was sponsorship and parenting. And it's just I wrote down parenting. I guess because I've gone through, I've survived. I'm a surviving parent in Narcotics Anonymous with kids, and that's, to me, that's a big miracle. A little bit about my mothering skills. I've got 3 kids, and one was born in 1967, the other one was born in 1975, and another one in 1977. And I didn't get clean until 1987. So that pretty much says that, especially for the oldest. 67 to 87, that's 20 years of the lifestyle, changing men, changing places, changing finances, changing drugs, changing attitudes, changing, period, the insanity. And he never knew his dad. And that's mainly because his dad left us when he was about 8 months old. And, Jim was, boy, it gave him a big chip on the shoulder, a big, huge, it wasn't even a chip, it was more like a block, And, of course, even besides the drug using, the lifestyle, what kids sometimes do is put that hurt and that pain and everything onto the person that's closest to them, which is me, and he hated me. Oof. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, he hated me for years. Rude, nasty, real painful, when I got clean, it's like he still didn't give a darn about me, he would call other people his mother. And he wouldn't come visit us, he wouldn't call, he wouldn't even talk to me, and if it was gimme, 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 and I gave, because I was so wrapped up in shame and guilt and all that stuff. My other 2 children are 10 years younger than him, and my daughter was 10 when I got clean, and my second child, and I guess I don't talk a lot about him because he's that the lost child in the family. He's the one that saw the violence, and saw the anger and all that coming from me. And so it's like he was quiet and he hid and he just stayed out of the way and made everything okay, and it's like he's missing a lot in my recovery. And he's missing a lot in my using too. That's just the way addiction was. That's just the way it was. And my daughter was the youngest, and she's the one that got the brunt of my anger and abuse. I know when I spoke here a couple years ago, I talked about my previous marriage and everything, and all the the violence and the abuse and all that. And what I do with her, because Jim was off on his own. He hated me, and Devin hid away, and Carrie loved me. So, and she was the littlest, and she was the one. I hate to say that I loved the most, but I was really close to her. She was the one I breastfed, she was my little girl, and she's the one I abused the worst, because I didn't, again, I guess it's like my son did with me, I did with her. I didn't know, I didn't have the guts to put my anger towards the person that I was angry at, so I poured towards the person I loved the most. And I learned, the fine line of killing a kid. There's a very fine line between me abusing her, and for some reason God didn't let me go over a certain line to where she could have died, and very easily could have, because I was so wrapped up in my shit, with my ex-husband. He wasn't physically abusive. My ex-husband was a verbal, emotional, spiritual, mental abuser. And I don't know how it happened, but somewhere along the line I started becoming his little girl, and he became my dad, and I'd be punished all the time, and then I'd get angry, and I'd get so scared of my little girl, causing some kind of mess to where I would get in trouble with her dad, and so I would punish her, and I get so angry with her. There were times where I would shake her. Today they call it baby syndrome, or shaken baby syndrome. And there were times when I remember the first time I slapped her I was so stressed, and I was so worried about how his parents were. Everything was just, I didn't know how to be a parent, I was just so, and she started crying, and she was only maybe 6 months old, and I slapped her in the face because she cried, and I thought I was going to get in trouble because she wasn't being a good baby, and I was afraid that his parents were going to see me as a terrible mother and all this, and I remember that, and it's like, oh my God, and I didn't remember that until just a while back. And I used to get so angry with her that I'd throw her against the wall. I'd get her hair, I'd grab her by the hair, and I'd shake her, and I'd go, "You're going to get me in trouble, Carrie. Damn it, stop it, wham!" And throw her, And it was like, oh, God. Him and I, their father and I, we split up, after 12 years, after 12 years we split up, which made her, just barely almost 10. And then I married Mike, who I'm married to still today. And a couple years after we were married, I went into, treatment, and I got clean. I found out about, this addiction. And that's where I found Narcotics Anonymous, was through H&I, thank God. And I stayed clean. And I remember doing my first fourth step, like right off, because I was in so much pain and so much fear and so much anger. My sponsor had me like go right into a fourth step, and let's get this stuff out of you. Just get it out here on paper, and I did that. And I did the fourth step with her. And all this came out. I never cried so hard in my life. I was God, I didn't realize what I was doing. I didn't realize, all that mixed up emotional stuff that we can get in using all those drugs and using that lifestyle and everything, and how I lost myself. I totally lost myself, to where I wasn't even an adult anymore. I wasn't even a mother anymore. I was another little kid that was trying to protect myself, among the other kids. And but when I got clean and I started working the steps, what I had to start doing was, one of the first things they told me was, you don't know how to be a mom, and that sounds normal, that's okay, but you know how to be an abusive mom. And I go, yeah. And my sponsor would say, just a day at a time, don't do what you did before, no matter what. No matter what, don't do what you did before. And I did that, for a long time in recovery. It's like, especially with my daughter, because she's the one that ended up moving in with us. My son was in the Navy by the time I got clean, and I didn't have my kids back for 2 years until I had 2 years clean, by the way, because my ex-husband, I was so broken down to being absolutely nothing, not capable of anything, a worthless human being. And I believed that he had custody of the kids, and he had the car, he had the house, he had all that. And so I didn't think I was capable of being a mom until I had a little over 2 years clean. And I worked through that time. I worked through that first 2 years of just watching my verbal abuse and my emotional abuse, because I learned how to do it real good too. And the kids learned how to do it because this family thing we had, this insanity, was that they knew how to push my buttons to get the reaction they wanted, which was anger, because that's the only kind of love that they knew they got from me. And my buttons would get pushed, and so I would push my ex-husband's buttons, and he'd get angry because I knew how to deal with that too. And so even the first few years in recovery, the kids, knew how to push my buttons. I'm sure all you have heard about button pushing kids. It's like they know exactly when to do it, how to do it, and the perfect timing. It's like, and all I could do the first few years was not do what I did before. I had no idea how to deal with the kids' anger. I had no idea how to love them unconditionally. I was scared to death to hold them and hug them. I didn't know how to handle the tantrums. My daughter was a really good one on that. I mean, she was. I don't understand how Mike survived. Those few years with my daughter and I. She was going through that preteen age, and God, and I did. I helped mess that up too, because I didn't know. I had no idea how to be a mom, because I was always loaded. I was always the kid myself saying, "Well, you take care of me. I'm going to be loaded. This is the way I want it." And I was a spoiled little brat too, and I didn't realize that. But she went through. God, her and I would get in screaming matches. I wouldn't call her a bitch anymore, but I would just scream, and she'd scream back, and it was like. And then finally, I'd see myself getting that point of that line, to where I wanted to kill her, and all I could do was just get her in her bedroom, and I had to leave the house, because I knew all I had to do was not do what I used to do, just not do, and that's was like picking up the drug. If you don't pick up the drug, you won't get loaded. If I don't react like I used to, verbally, mentally, emotionally, physically, I won't hurt them again. And that was so hard to do. I thought I was going to go crazy. Crazy during that time. I was so wrapped up, and by that time, and this is getting a few years in the program, I got to the point to where I was so wrapped up with knowing what not to do, not knowing what to do, and not reacting emotionally, to them, not allowing that button pushing, to happen, and I just. Man, I just survived those years. I just survived. But I did what my original sponsor first told me, and I'd go to the meetings, and I'd go to, and I'd talk about it at meetings, and I'd talk to other parents that are in the meetings that have worked through some of this stuff and learned how to be a mom. There weren't a lot of women, at the time that were my age and had kids. That age. Most of the women that came in and the men came in had, they either never had kids or hadn't had kids yet, or the kids, maybe the oldest might have been like 4 or 5 years old. And it's like, wow, I wish I had that chance, But then I had to accept that I didn't. I didn't. For some reason, my kids had to go through what they had to go through. They each one of them has their own set of problems, and none of them know how to have a relationship, a healthy relationship with another person. Not one of them. And I started getting into so much of that guilt and shame. Oh man, I really screwed my kids up, and and that's where my controlling came in, because I was going to try and make sure everything was right for them. Now that I'm clean, I'm not going to let this happen to them or that happen to them, and I'm not going to react like normal parents do. And from doing that, what it was is I went from this extreme to this extreme. because what happened was that with my daughter, and like I said, she was the one that was living with us. I allowed her to start dating boys when she was like 12, you know, and I was so much wanted her. I mean, what was going on was that I placed myself in her shoes, emotionally, physically, everything, to where whatever she did, whatever happened to her, hurt me 10 times more than it hurt her. I was taking on all her emotions, you know, I was taking on all her just all the emotions. I didn't do it with the two boys, because the two boys weren't like with us, you know, they weren't with me physically. Jim, you know, he was in the Navy, or he was off doing his thing, and again, you know, he was just, you know, the only time he'd call is he'd want something, and then if I didn't give it to him, he'd cuss me out, and then it's like, oh man, guilt, shame, all over again, you know, I'm not doing this right. Devin would never ask for nothing, of course, but he was living with his dad, and you know, and I let him go live with his dad, and his dad's still a user, was still a user. So it's like he wasn't part in my life. He wasn't in my life that much to where Carrie was. And, you know, it was really hard seeing her go through different stuff. And it was hard because I was taking it all on. I thought I was responsible for everything, and I was reacting to what she was going through exactly like I was reacting when I was a teenager and I wasn't being accepted, and this guy broke my heart and I lost my virginity, and I did bad in school, and you know, and it was like looking in a mirror, and you know, that I found out, and that was something I figured out between God and myself. That was something that was another form of abuse, and I hadn't even realized it. You know, I was robbing her, and I robbed her of her teen years. I robbed her because I was so into her being a teenager and trying to be the way I wanted, not the way my parents did me. You know how we go through that, where I'm not going to do that to my kids, you know, when I have them. There's reasons why some of that stuff happens. You know, there's reasons. You know, my family didn't have the balance and the knowledge, but at least there were reasons. We had, you know, I was raised with knowing my limitations, you know, and knew what was expected of me and what wasn't, and what would happen. And I guess what it came down to is that I didn't know. I was so worried about being like my parents that I tried to be the opposite of my parents, and from doing that, I turned into a little kid myself and kept reacting to the kids on their level instead of an adult, you know, dealing with children. And that's where that abuse, I think, all came out. It's like I was really screwed up, you know, and so much of that I brought from my childhood in, and I gave it to my kids. You know, take my baggage, you know. I can't get rid of it, so I'll share it with you. Yeah, that's basically what I did. I gave them my baggage of crap. And, you know, from that time, it was like I did a lot of learning. You know, I've done a lot of learning with parenting. When it got to the point to where, like, my daughter was still living with us, and she lived with us until Omaha, when we were in Omaha. And, you know, it's like, took care of her, fed her, got her anything she needed, because, God, I knew how it was not to have nothing. And she's still going through men left and right, one after the other, and I was taking all that in, and oh my God, I know what it feels like, and da-da-da. You know, it's one thing about sharing experience strength without the hope. You know, and I was sharing the experience and strength with her, but neither one of us had the hope in there. And my oldest son, he was off still doing his thing, you know, and the same thing. He's like in Seattle, and he's you know, trying to be an artist, and he's a good artist, but it's like, you know, and Mom would sit there and go, well, you know, you're a really great artist, but you're not going to make a living out of it, because he never had any money, so we kept giving him money, you know, because I didn't want to see any of my kids living in a car. And it was like he always took, but he never knew how to give the love back or be nice, like that. So I always took care of him like that too, and the emotional part. And I remember him coming home, coming to our place one night, and my son's gay, and he had broken up with his significant other, and he came to my house, and it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. Woke me up, and he was just crying. That's the first time I ever seen my kid cry. And he was like 25, 26 at the time, and just cried and sobbed, and I didn't know what to do. It's like, oh my God, what do you do? I just, I knew what not to do, which was just say, well, I don't know what to do with this, just go and do it yourself, anything like that. But I just, held him, it was really uncomfortable, but I held him. And, but you know what, in the back of my head, I was hoping maybe if I hold him, he'll love me. And that didn't change anything. He was still angry with me, and again, it was like, he learned how to do emotional abuse real well too. They were all brought up to learn, and they learned it all well. And my middle son still, it's like, Devin's Devin, Devin's Devin. And I used to call him my, and I still do, I call him my deadhead son, and he's my deadhead son, and then I've got my gay son, and then I got my emotionally dysfunctional daughter. And that's how I describe my kids, Today, my middle kid's still a deadhead, though, which is okay because I'm proud of him on that, As far as, that's something else. But anyway, what I finally had to learn, and the hardest thing I had to learn was this button pushing thing. Somewhere along the line, I had to get to the point of like the first step, and the serenity prayer is like, I can't change them. The only person I can change is me and how I react to them. So I had to really, really, really work on button pushing. And what I learned how to do that by is, and I had the sponsor tell me, and it's like, duh. She goes, tell them no. And it's like, I can't tell them no. I never told my kids no. And what she said, though, was that she said, the more I try and control their lives, I'm denying them their life. I'm killing them, is what I'm doing. And if I love my kids the way I said I do, I have to start letting them be responsible for their own lives. I mean, these are kids that were over, thank God, they were all over the age of 18, And I started doing that one at a time, and I worked on Devin first because he wasn't in, he wasn't in the scene. And I didn't have to do it too much with him. Our daughter, like I said, when we moved to Omaha, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life was tell her that she had 2 months to get a job and get a place to live, or she was going, either had the choice of living in her car or going back to her dad's. And the hardest part about that was that I stuck to it. I stuck to it. I had such fear of, oh my God, especially a girl on the streets. I mean, I know what happens, and she doesn't get into a lot of alcohol and drugs, but she does get into the bar scene because that's where the men are, but we gave her that ultimatum, which is the first time I ever did, and she goes, okay. And it's like, gee, if I knew it was this easy, I would have done it years ago, But she said okay because she started getting excited, and I talked to her. I've learned differently about, instead of going, well, you got 2 months and your ass is out of here. Instead, it's like I try to work it like, oh man, Carrie, you'd have so much fun because you wouldn't have to be, living by our rules, and you can come and go when you want, and you can have your cats with you in the same room, and we'll help you get, look for a place, and I try to keep it like positive and get excited, and she got excited about that, and she got her first place, She got her first place. She bought herself a car. She got herself a job. And it's like, damn. I could have done that years ago, but I didn't know how. But I learned how to do it from the other, parents in the program. Going to NA and going to the meetings and crying and trying to figure this out and working different stuff. And it's like anything else. If I try and keep fitting this round thing in this square thing, it ain't going to fit. But if I can find the other square thing, put the square thing in, it's going to slide right in. It's like, oh. And she's still living by herself. Today, she's still by herself. Today, it's so hard to still let the kids be responsible for themselves, but be there today emotionally for them and love them just the way they are, and still have that door open to where if it really gets rough, you can come back home for a little bit, for a little bit. And that's because I've learned how to put up boundaries. I've learned to set my boundaries up and not be so enmeshed in theirs. And it was really hard because, after so many years of living, the kids living, expecting and doing all this way, and then all of a sudden mom's not reacting, it's like, whoa, they didn't like it. None of them liked it. Devin, he just got married last year, and I got my first little grandbaby. And the first thing I did with him when I sat down was I sat down and I wrote him a letter because we were still I was in Texas. Wrote him a letter on his birthday with his card, and I did it in a very loving, very nurturing way, but I don't beat around the bush anymore. I let him know that this is what I expect because I'm a grandma and this is my grandbaby, and I don't care what you do with your life, but I do care about how my granddaughter's raised. And like I said, he's still living down in Morton, and which is a population of 1,200 people, and that's where we did most of our drugging and pot, and his dad still grows the pot, and he still sells it, and of course Devin still smokes, and Araminta smokes, and they're living with on the bottom floor of the house with her parents above. They smoke, so it's like, and I told him, I go, I don't want my baby around that, I don't want that little baby, to be around that. And, and what that turned out to be, that I figured out, this has all been over the past year, is that I was still trying to control stuff. I don't have any power over that. But what I've learned over the year is that Stasha, she's got one place she can go for nurturing and love and good hugs and positive, communication. She can come to our house, or when I'm with her, it's like, instant bond. I had to learn how to do that too. Luckily, I think most of you guys have seen the little puppies. Luckily, I learned how to do that from one of my puppies, the one that died a few months ago before we got these. What it was is that I was going to go visit. It was right after the baby was born, right after. And I was going to go up there and see the grandbaby, and it was like I was scared to death because if I had that baby in my arm and if she started crying, would I throw her against the wall? I was scared to death. I was scared to death to hold that baby because I thought, and I knew they were going to leave me with her. And it's like, whew, total fear, total fear. And my therapist, I talked it over with her, and my therapist said, "You're going to be okay. You're a good grandma. You were a good mom, and you're going to be a fantastic grandma." And about that time, we got this little puppy, another little Shih Tzu. And God, it was. See, that's why I'm hooked on these now, these little dogs, because they're so unconditional love, and they're so cuddly, and they just get, they get their arms around me, and they kiss me, and Jelly was her name. She taught me how to hold a baby. you know, and it felt so good. And when I got down to Morton, and the parents took off, and I was with the baby, and it's like, oh my God, okay, God, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And she started crying while they were gone, and I rocked her, you know, and I said the Serenity Prayer, and she cuckooed and stopped crying, you know, and it's like, I'm learning, you know, I'm learning. I didn't have the opportunity to learn with my own kids, you know, getting clean when they were littler, or waiting and, you know, getting clean, getting pregnant, having a baby and having a clean daddy, to go, you know, recovery and all this. But I've got the chance today, you know, I've got the chance with my grandbaby. And she's teaching me how to, you know, love, nurture, hold, trust, connect, not enmeshed, but connect, because we just got back from Washington just a couple weeks ago before we turned around and came back down or up here, and it's like Stasha, we missed her birthday. We were there, and we ended up getting there like a week and a half after, you know, her birthday. And last time I saw her, she was like a few weeks old. Okay, and it's like, she's not going to know me. I mean, you know, I've been sending her cards, I've been talking to her, you know, and all this, and but you know, that connection thing, it's like, what if she doesn't like me? What if she doesn't know who I am because she's got grandma and grandpa above her all the time, and she's got grandpa over here, Devin's, you know, dad, and it's like, then there's a stranger in Texas, you know, and I was so scared going up there. And God pulled up, and Araminta came out with Stasha, and she goes, there's grandma, there's grandma. Instant connection. I mean, just instant. It was like we had never been apart. You know, it was like we'd never been apart. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't going to work by the time she gets to preteens and everything, you know. But at this time, so there's that bond there, that invisible bond that I never knew, you know, was impossible, or was possible to have. You know, I'd heard about it, but I never understood it. So I know it's there, and no, we really bonded, and she bonded with Mike really quick. It took her a couple more days for him, because, you know, she bonds. Of course, babies bond more quicker to women than they do men, and he was excited about that, you know, because it's his grandbaby. He doesn't have any kids of his own, so this is his grandbaby. But these are all things. This is how I've learned. You know, this is how I've learned, and I've learned it with God's help. You know, and I've learned it with through the members of Narcotics Anonymous that teach me. You know, well, you know what not to do. Just don't do it. If you don't know what to do, that's okay. Just don't do what you did before. You know, and then the rest will come. And that's what I did. You know, on just about a daily basis. My oldest son, the hardest one with him, because he is the one that is so full of, I'm so full of guilt over, and he's so angry, and he hates me and all this. When we were living in Omaha again, that was like, what, 3 years ago, it was about 4 years ago. My son was running here and running there and living here, and it's all your fault, Mom, and, you know, you caused my whole life to be shitty, and, you know, all that anger and stuff. And same thing that I did with my daughter. I try to go, you know, love him and just say, you know, you're responsible for your life. I can't. I did my amends with my kids, but I can't do it forever. You know, sooner or later I had to learn that I made the amends with all my heart, and now I got to let them go. You know, I've got to let them go. And they'll either love me or they'll hate me. They'll either be with me or they won't be with me. It's going to be God's decision, because I don't have that kind of control anymore, and I don't want that control anymore. And so he ended up, what happened was he ended up in Denver, working there. And I got this telephone call. And it was from the mental institution up there. It was the padded cell in the police department. That Jim got to the point of so much pain and hatred and everything inside him that he didn't want to live anymore. And so what he did was he drove his car about 4 miles out of the small town, and this was in the middle of the winter, okay, 4 miles out, parked the car, and he hiked about 5 miles in the snow with nothing on but a shirt, pants, and shoes. And he had a bottle of wine or whiskey or something on him. And that was his determination. He was going to walk until he got tired, sit underneath a tree, drink, pass out, and die. And he told me that's what his plans were. And he did that. He walked 5 miles in. It was like, probably 20 below zero. The snow, well, up in Colorado, around Vail, deep snow. He got a tree. He drank. He started getting tired, and he said to himself, he's going, I don't want to die. Oh man, I don't want to die. And by then, though, he's like 5 miles in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, okay? He said that. He says, I don't want to die. And 2 snowshoers out of thousands of acres of mountain, 2 snowshoers came by and found him and took him, down into Boulder and turned him over to the hospital and all that. And that's the call we got, your son's here. So Mike and I packed up and we made that mad dash to Boulder. And, oh no, it wasn't Boulder, it was Aspen. Mad dash to Aspen, and there he was in the nut pad cell, and he told me what happened. That was exactly basically the words he said. And he said, I don't know. He says, I just didn't want to die. And I told him, I go, you know what? God's got plans for you. Maybe it's just plans that you're going to be okay and happy. And then we had a choice of, and his dad also came down from Morton, but the police gave us a choice of release him into our custody, or he'd have to stay in the padded cell, or he can go in his dad's custody. And Mike and I talked it over. We went back to Jim, and we go, okay, we'll take you with us, but as soon as we get back to Omaha, you're going straight into treatment. Okay? And that's your choice. He went with his dad. It's like, oh my God, that might be contagious, N.A. And but he went with his dad. He went with his dad. But the thing is that what? Not everybody needs NA. Not everybody's a drug addict. Even the kids that I have that are raised around it and have all experimented. I've got one son that's a drug addict, and that's the middle son. He's an addict. My daughter's not. She just doesn't know how to live life on life's term. She doesn't know how to have a relationship. She has absolutely no self-respect, self-image of herself, self-esteem, nothing. And I pray to God every day that she gets it, and she might, as long as I stay out of the picture as much as I can. She called me the other day, and she ran away from Morton, and we ended up in Las Vegas. And she was crying on the telephone, about all that insanity back in Morton and everything, and all the drugs and all that, and her dad, how he verbally abuses her, and I'm like, oh yeah, duh. And now, and I didn't say that. I didn't say, now you see why I left him. I didn't say that. I didn't say none of that. I just said, you know what? You don't have to live like that anymore, Carrie. I go, why didn't you get a hold of Al-Anon or something? Just call Adult Children of Alcoholics. I says, there's help out there for you. If you want it, it's there. And it doesn't cost anything. You don't have to go to a psychiatrist, if you can't afford it, but that's there. I said, it's $1 or $2 in a basket, and I says, these people know exactly where you're at, exactly. And then I let it go. That's her choice, and she's still still down in Las Vegas, or outside. She's still in Nevada, and I've had to let her go, I'm still calling her to make sure she's feeling okay, and she's had some really bad physical stuff, but Mom hasn't ran down there to fix her, she's an adult, she's got choices. But if she really needs help, she knows that Mike and I are there in a split second. Jim has, he's growing up. You know, I have allowed him to grow up, is what it is. I have allowed him to become an adult. I've allowed my daughter to become an adult. And I've allowed Devin, my middle one, to become an adult because he's responsible for his addiction. I can't do nothing about that. He knows the choices. He knows the way out, you know. And that's something that Narcotics Anonymous has given him, you know, is that it's out there. The word's out there. There's help. And my oldest son, he loves me today, and he tells me he loves me, and he really means it. You know, really means it. I don't know what happened up there, you know, in the snow, but I know what happened back down there in Aspen when we said, you know, this is what's going to happen. You got a choice. And I talked to him about, you know, you got to grow up. It's your life, and I'm not responsible for anything that goes on in your life today. And that's the last time I made amends to him. I'm sorry for what happened in the past, but I can't change it. I can't fix it for you. I can't make it different. I says, you got to make your own life different. And I says, for some reason, God didn't let you die. You know, and he's been with his significant other now for over 3 years. It's a crazy relationship. Oh man, it's crazy. I don't get around it because I'm staying out of it. That relationship's none of my business, you know. And no more than Devin and Araminta's relationship is my business. Grandbaby, yes. Them, no. And but they love me today. Mm-hmm. My grandbaby loves me. And my daughter she might still go through a time where she's going to hate me, but that's okay. If she ever gets the help she needs, I hope she does go through that phase, you know, because she's got the anger there, and she deserves that anger. And that's something I've given my kids, I guess, is I give them the right to own whatever they're feeling. You know, and my oldest son loves me. He didn't call me Mother's Day, but you know what? That's okay today. That's okay because I know he loves me. He's told me. And that first time ever. So, you know, it works. You know, it works. If I keep doing what I have to do in NA, keep working the steps, and through the steps is where I learn what's my shit and what's yours. You know, and that's all it comes down to. That's all it comes down to is I'm going to be the best parent I can. You know, I'm going to try the best I can, but that's all I can do is try the best I can. And the results is up to God, you know, because I'm just here to bring the kids in and do as much guidance as I can. I don't own them, you know, and I'm not God. So I'm glad you guys are here because that's where I learned it from, you know, was the other people in NA. Thanks. Oh, good. You got almost 45 minutes, too.
I'd like to introduce our co-speaker, and this is Judy, and I ran into her this morning.
Another one.
Literally. I wasn't looking, I was in awe, and she stopped and we collided, and anyways, she's real soft to run into, and that's not all I can share with you, but I'll give the floor to Judy.
Hi, I'm Judy, and I'm an addict.
Judy.
Okay, thank you. I talk to people on a daily basis because that's what I do for a living. I don't usually talk too much about myself or my family. Every now and then I do a little bit here and there, but for the most part, this is not something that I normally do. Because I do it every day, I think, well, let somebody else talk. But when I walked into the main room and, you know, they said, well, sign up for something, and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, then I heard somebody in the background telling somebody else, take a risk, you know, step up, take a risk. And I said, okay, God, I hear you. So here I am. I had originally stopped using around 1981-82. I lost a friend of mine, and her death basically gave me back my life. And I couldn't figure out why God would take her and leave me, who was not a good mother, you know, who yelled at her kids, who smacked her kids, who was using, and take her, who was a good person. She was a good mother. She was a nurse. And I couldn't figure that out. But that's what sent me on my journey into recovery. And I learned through another fellowship how to detach. I went to a program for spouses. For 11 years I went. For spouses of people that were alcoholics and addicts, because I didn't think that I had a problem. I wouldn't look at my own problem because I was too busy looking at my husband's. And my children were right there behind me to support me because I was mostly a closet user. I wasn't just out there blatantly using, I was a closet user. And so it wasn't real easy for them to identify with the fact that I was the one using, because I always was like, yeah, Dad, Dad, Dad. My son, I have 3 children, or we have 3 children. My son will be 30 in June, and he's the oldest. And my kids know, you know, they are well aware and talk about it all the time, that he has always been and probably will always. When my husband was still using and I was no longer using, he was my confidant. I told him everything, told him many things I should not have told him, because that was not acceptable behavior for me, and I learned that. I learned it through the program about what healthy boundaries are and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in relationships as well as in dealing with kids. When my husband stopped using in '82, at that point in time we started going to family counseling, and that really helped us, because I would, like Bernie, you know, I used to scream so much at my kids. I would scream till I couldn't talk anymore. I yelled so much. I had so much anger in me, and I took it out on them, yelling constantly at them. They would be the ones that would have to suffer, because they would go to school and they wouldn't, you know, Puma shoes. I don't know if any of you remember those, but they were like the hot shoes for the time. Well, my son wanted a pair, but of course, you know, we were too busy using the money to get high with, so when they went out of style and I saw some at the store in the sale rack, I said, oh wow, cool, I'll get Christine's, you know, these Pumas. So I brought them home, and here's your Pumas, you know, I'm finally getting them for you. Well, at that point in time, they were no longer in style, so of course he went to school again, and you know, the kids would make fun of him because he was not what was called okay. He wanted to you know, join Little League. Couldn't do that because we used the money for something else. Couldn't afford that. No, you don't need to do that. When our kids were little, they went to bed at 7 o'clock. They went to bed at 7 o'clock, I think, till Chris was 10, maybe 10, 11. I don't know how old he was, but they used to cry, Mom, why do we have to go to bed now? It's light outside and everybody's still outside playing. And you'd say, well, but you have to because it's 7 o'clock. Well, the reason why we wanted them to go to bed at 7 o'clock was because that was our time to party. It was our time. You go to bed now. We had a lock on the door, on the bedroom door, because our youngest daughter, you know, who is today is an addict. She always was. You could basically see it in her when she was little, too. She wouldn't stay in the room. And she was the one that mostly got the blunt of my anger. So we put a lock on the bedroom door to keep her in there at night. And she used to pound on the door to come out, you know, but we wouldn't let her out because we were too busy. Things changed. When we stopped using, we started going to counseling, and we learned what was acceptable and what wasn't acceptable. And they still try to push our buttons because that's what they were used to. That's what they know, you know. That's all they know. They don't know anything other than, you know, I know I can get a reaction out of you. If I can't get positive reinforcement from you and positive love from you, then I'll do something bad so that I can at least get some attention from you. Doesn't matter what kind of attention I get as long as I get some attention. And so that's what they did. And our youngest one learned from me really well. When I was growing up, the only time I got attention from my father was if I was sick. And I carried that over into my marriage, that I knew that if I got sick, I'd get attention. And I taught my youngest daughter really well. So well that she would go to school. We had a medical book, and she'd go to school. And this is when we were clean. She'd go to school, and she'd have the sickness of the week. And I think at one point in time, she went to the nurse's office and told the nurse that she had something wrong with her prostate. So they would call and say, you need to come and get her. She's sick. Not that time, but, she's sick. And we would say, okay, sure. Because we knew, she wasn't sick. She was just looking for some attention. And she was always the one that was, starving for attention, crying for attention. And she would go to any lengths to get that. That's why I said, we could see that she was an addict years and years ago. Our son also. Our middle daughter is not. She was also the lost child and the hero of the family. She was an honor student. She did really well. She's got a wonderful job. She's getting married in September. She's having a big hoopty wedding. And she's doing really well. Our son, comes and goes. He just moved out of the house. He was married. He has 2 beautiful little girls who we no longer see because of the relationship that he and his, wife no longer have. And so those little girls we don't get to see anymore. And that breaks my heart because they're like 6 and 7. But it was teaching those kids, the only thing that we knew. I couldn't give them anything I didn't know how to give. If I wasn't taught something, I can't turn around and teach somebody else how to do it if I don't know how to do it. Work in the program, like Bernie said, going to meetings. I did work. I was going to do a workshop when our kids were older. We were involved in this organization called Operation Snowball, which is an awareness program for teenagers. It's a weekend lock-in with teenagers, like 250. And working with them, this is before I was in the field. I was only clean for a while. Working with those kids and listening to them and hearing what those kids said, really helped me to look at myself and my kids and the relationship that I had with my kids. And I was going to do a workshop with this other girl that had to do with abuse issues. So I got this book that this other little girl let me borrow, and it was called Courage to Heal, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. But once you open that book, you can't close that sucker because you've opened up a can of worms, and there's the only way you can do it is walk through the door and deal with it. Well, I was going to be the one to do this workshop with this girl because I was going to be the mother of the daughter who was sexually assaulted. Because our middle daughter, when she was 2 and a half, 3, my husband and I went out and we let this guy that, we got high with, he was just a kid, and he was staying at our house, and we came home and she said, I can undo so-and-so's belt. And the red flags went up in my head. And I said, what? I can undo so-and-so's belt. So I was going to be the one to do this as the mother of the child that was sexually assaulted. And in the process, when I opened up the book, said, oh my God, this ain't her, this is me. And started dealing with my own abuse issues at that point in time. And then watching my kids live through and go through the things that they went through. There was a lot of turmoil, even in recovery, because we didn't know how to do what to do. My son wanted my husband to start using again. He told him, he said, I wish you would start using again because I liked you better when you were high. And the reason he liked him better when he was high was because he could manipulate and control the situation. That's the reason he liked him better high. And so he had remained my confidant until we started going to counseling. And the counselor told my husband he needed to back off because all he saw was black and white, and all I ever saw was gray. You know, I was always real wishy-washy. Well, okay, you know, all right. And I didn't say no. You know, I would say, well, we'll see, or I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, or whatever the case may be. So the counselor told my husband to back off, and to back off and let me be the hard guy for a while. But I couldn't be as hard as my husband would like me to be, so that didn't work. So the kids manipulated and did a lot of controlling. For a long time they did that. I want this, well, we'll get it. In 1984, my husband's grandfather passed away, and at that point in time, we didn't have nothing. We really had nothing. And my husband's grandfather's wife passed away, and he asked us to come and live with him. He had a business, and we moved in with him, and it was like Christmas every day. Every day. I broke off a handle on the buffet that was in the dining room, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in trouble now. I'm going to get yelled at. Because while I was growing up, what my father called me was a goddamn little son of a bitch who was just always in the way. And that's all I knew. And my husband's grandfather, who was my grandpa, taught me how to love men and not expect that they want anything from me other than just to love me. The relationship that I had with Grandpa helped me to heal the relationship that I have with my dad, which ultimately helped me to heal the relationship with my husband as well as my son. God's blessed me with the opportunity to work in a field where I work with all boys. That's what I do. But when we lived with my husband's grandfather, I broke that handle, and I thought I was really going to be in trouble, and that we were going to get thrown out, and that was going to be the end of that. And my husband's grandpa said, oh, that's all right, we'll fix it, don't worry about it. And then he remodeled the kitchen, and I got to pick out new cabinets, and I was like, oh my God. And then in the process, he would take our youngest daughter to the mall because he would walk. He needed to walk because he had a heart problem. And they would go walk in the mall, and every time she'd come back, she'd have a toy. So she liked to go to walks with Grandpa. And then when they would go to the grocery store, it started out with a little bag of candy, and then it got to a bigger bag of candy, then it got to and then we had bags, grocery bags full of candy that Grandpa would buy for these kids because he never had kids per se to take care of, to nurture and love, because his wife took his kids away, and he wasn't allowed to see them. We saw him on the sly, and so he loved those kids, and he would give them anything, and he did, and he spoiled all of us rotten. And my youngest daughter would eat that candy, sneak that candy, do all of these things with that candy because Grandpa would, here, you can have it. My son broke his radio, and I was a mess because I thought, again, we're going to get thrown out. This is it. We're blowing it. We're going to get thrown out. And, of course, we yelled at him. You dummy, how could you do this? What'd you do that to Grandpa's radio for? Why couldn't you be careful? You can't never be careful with nothing. You ruin everything. You destroy everything. What's wrong with you? Grandpa says, come on. He says, that's okay. We'll go get a new one. And we were all like, because that wasn't the way I was raised. I know that wasn't the way my husband was raised. They probably didn't even have a radio. He came from a very, very dysfunctional family. He thought when he met me that, I was like rich. He found out differently, but that's what he thought. But, Grandpa was good to all of us and spoiled all of us. Grandpa passed away in '87 and devastated all of us. Mostly our youngest daughter, because and myself, but more her. Because I had someplace that I could go to. I could go to meetings and I could talk about it and I could share about it, and she didn't know what to do with it. So she started eating. And she ate and she ate and she ate. And we moved to where we're living now after Grandpa passed away. And we had a business that Grandpa had given to us that we inherited. So that's when I said we had all this money. There was no reason for the kids to want for anything. We went from having nothing to wanting for nothing. You want 6 watches. Remember when people used to wear like 3 watches at a time? That's what the kids did way back when. Well, you want 6 watches? Cool. We'll get you 6 watches. It was nothing for us to go to the mall on a weekend and let them each spend $1,000. That was nothing for them to do. Well, we had this business, and through the process of our disease of not using drugs, but the behavior was still there. Because we have this threefold disease, using is just part of it, the behavior was still there. The addiction of, if I get one sweater in blue, but there's 4 more colors, I'm going to get every color they got because, that's good stuff. And that's what I taught my kids to do. I taught them that. Because, those Pumas, they weren't the ones in style. So damn it, these kids are going to have everything that's in style now. Then they went to a school where the kids didn't have a lot, and then they were, made fun of because they had a lot. So it was like it was hit or miss for them. Well, when we moved into our house that we live in now, my husband's family contested Grandpa's will. Long story short, we lost the business. We filed bankruptcy. We had nothing again. We had each other. We had our house. I always knew that God would take care of us, always, because I had a relationship with higher power, and I always knew that. And the kids went through an adjustment. I had already gone through it, but they hadn't. They didn't know, other than why can't I get that dress now that costs $40, Why can't I do that? Why can't I get those new Nike gym shoes like everybody else has? We couldn't do it anymore. And that was a real struggle. Well, in particular, the oldest and the youngest, the middle one did real well in school, so, she was looked at that she was really smart. I mean, she always was smart, but she was always smart, so the kids kind of looked at her as smart, and she became a pom cat in high school. She did really well. But the oldest and the youngest were the ones that really struggled, and because my son was my baby, our youngest daughter is my husband's baby. Okay, and so there was always that conflict between my husband and my son, and myself and my youngest daughter. And when she was like, I think the first time was 12, she started having some problems, and we, had to put her in a psych unit for adolescents. And she did all right. She did real good in a structured environment because she got all the attention in the world that she wanted. Then she'd come home, and we would say, okay, this, and this is how it's going to be, because we learned, this is what you need to do. And of course, because of my wishy-washy, I said, well, okay, you don't have to, it's okay, go ahead. So she ended up back in the hospital again. And then, I think the third time she ended up back in the hospital, because see, she found out if I get in the hospital, I get things. Like I told you, I taught her well. I get things. I get clothes, I get shoes, I get all the attention I want in the world. All these people listen to me and listen to my sob story of how terrible I had it my whole life, when she never saw either of us use. Because she was like 13 months old when I think when I stopped using. I think she was 13 months old. I relapsed in '88 at a wedding. So that's why I have 13 years and my husband has 19, because I relapsed at a wedding. But irregardless, she ended up back in the hospital, and she came home, and we were fighting, and she pissed me off, and I went up in her room and smacked the heck out of her, just smacked her, and she told me, like the day after or something like that, she said, if you touch me again, she said, I'm going to call somebody. And I told her, you know what, you ain't going to have to call nobody, because I am. It wasn't long after that she was put in placement. And she lived in placement for 2.5 years, I think, in a residential facility. She tried to kill herself, or attempted, made us think that she was doing those things to get detention that she wanted. And then she was in that residential facility for like I said, for 2.5 years. My insurance had run out, and where I was working, and she became a ward of the state. We made her a ward of the state, because in Indiana they have this thing called CHINS, which is Child in Need of Service. And so then you can put your child in the state custody, so that they can then, the state pays for wherever it is that they put her. And they put her in this really good place in Illinois called Camelot, which was a wonderful facility. And we would go there every week. It was like 2.5 hours away from home. And we would go every week, for family counseling, and every week to pick her up for PASS. And we would sit in the family counseling sessions, and she would try to, say this, and this, and we would say, yeah, but that's not how it is anymore. And she did really good there. She did really, like I said, it was a structured environment where she got all the attention in the world that she wanted, and had, this is the day that Jenny's going to cook, because they had all these little stickers and whatever. Pan was the day you cooked, a washing machine was the day you did your laundry, and this was that. And so she had all these things structured for her. This is what she's going to do. One of the things let me backtrack. When we first moved in with Grandpa, she got hit by a car. It was July 6th, and my husband we had just bought a swing set and put it in the yard, and the cement needed to get hard. So she wanted to go across the street and go play with these kids. So I let her go across the street and play with these girls, and she decided she was coming home by herself. And the girl told her to wait, and she said, no, I'm going now, and she got hit by a car. She almost died. Well, because we were still sick back then, my husband said it was my fault because I let her go across the street. That was just when we were just early into recovery. I know today that he wouldn't say that, but that was what he said back then. And I carried that guilt with me for years, that it was my fault that this kid got hit by a car, and she used that. Forever she used that. I think today she still tries to use it. So we went to, like I said, we went to counseling, and they said that she was ready to come home, and we'd get just ready for her to come home, and she'd sabotage the whole thing so that she didn't have to come home. And then we would, keep working at this process in the counseling sessions with her and the counselor, and she would tell us how she felt and this and that, and we would say, yeah, but this is really the reality behind it. And she'd get ready to come home, and she'd sabotage it again. That's why she was there for 2.5 years. Well, towards the very end, she sent me this letter and told me, it was all my fault and this and that and here and there. And for a little teeny tiny bit, I was going to accept responsibility for it. And I was like, you know what? You're there because you continue to make the choice to be there. It isn't because of anything that I did or I didn't do. Now you are responsible for it because you know what to do today. You're choosing not to do it. Because at that point in time, I believe I was working in the field at that point in time. And so I learned. I learned what boundaries were because we didn't have boundaries. When I was growing up, you didn't close the bathroom door because somebody might want to come in and use the bathroom. Don't you lock that bathroom door. I didn't know what boundaries were. I had no clue. So I couldn't teach my children what boundaries were because I didn't have any. My husband didn't have any. Our son not too long ago said something about boundaries. And I said, well, you were never taught boundaries because you didn't have any. I didn't know what they were, so how could I teach them to you? I said, today I know what they are. Today I know when someone is saying something that's unacceptable, to say, that's inappropriate. My family learned those words. That's inappropriate. Because I came home from work one day and said, that's very inappropriate what you're saying. And they were like, but today they all know that's inappropriate. Don't say that. Respect boundaries of people. There's certain things that you say in front of certain people, and there's certain things that you don't say in front of certain people because you respect the boundary that person has set up. The example of no boundaries, this is a wonderful one. There was a point in time when I had filled the bath water up, I had laid out my clothes on the bed, I had a clean pair of underwear on my bed. The kids were getting ready for school. By the time I got out of the bathroom and came into my room, I'm looking around and I'm like, where did those underwear go? Well, I said, I know where they went. So I went to my oldest daughter, the one that did really well, and said, what kind of underwear do you have on? She said, what? I said, what kind of underwear do you have on? She said, Ma. So she said, I have my underwear on. I said, okay. So, of course, I went to my youngest daughter that I love dearly, Jennifer, and said, Jennifer, what kind of underwear on? She said, well, you weren't wearing them. And that was how it was. If you're not drinking this water, I guess it's mine now. Well, today I know that's addict behavior because addicts don't know boundaries. There is none. If you're not using it, give it to me out. I will. And that's just how it was. And today they're learning what boundaries are because this is not acceptable and this is acceptable. This is mine. Don't touch it. What my husband would get a new radio or something. He would say, "Don't touch this. It's mine. Don't touch it." And the kids would say, "Well, can we play the radio?" I said, "Oh, sure, it's okay." Because I didn't respect his boundary. That was his radio. I didn't respect it. I said, "Sure, go ahead and play it. It's all right." Well, then of course they'd break the aerial off or some mess because there's kids. And I would go, oh, God, now we're going to be in trouble, and try and tape it up or, help them hide it or something, whatever the case may be. Because that's what we did. And, today we know. If you ask and someone says no, you need to respect the fact that they said no and just move on. No, you can't. Oh, all right. Try and manipulate, well, why not? My son just got a new apartment, and I have plants. I have a lot of plants that some of them I've had for a lot of years, longer. Some of them I've had longer than he's been alive. A couple of them. And, not him, excuse me, the oldest one, the older girl. So, maybe like 25 years I've had a couple of those plants. And he said, boy, I sure like those plants, Ma. I said, yeah, well, so do I. Well, I sure like one of those plants, I really like one of those plants. I said, well, are you trying to ask me if you can have one of my plants? Because if you are, the answer is no. Don't touch my plants. You like one of my plants? Go to the store and buy one, You can get one for like $8. There you go. But I really like those. I said, too bad. Those are my plants. Now, a few years ago, I would have said, sure, here, take them, But I know today, this is my boundary. Don't cross it. And that's what I've learned. And, if I can't share anything more than sharing with you to set boundaries and set limits and teach them what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And the only way I know to do that is to keep going to meetings and listening to what people are saying and learning, learning what is appropriate and what isn't appropriate. Telling a dirty joke in front of a little kid, that's not appropriate. In the past there was nothing, when I was growing up, if you asked my dad what time it was, he'd say, milking time, everybody grab a tit. There's no little kids in here, are there? That's what he would say. That's what I grew up with. So, we didn't, I'd come down the stairs and he'd say, good morning, sexless. There were no boundaries. None of us were taught that, so it was like, well, I didn't know that it was not okay to say those things in front. I did not know that it was not okay to make my son my confidant because I was never taught that. When I grew up, I was my mother's baby. And I told you I was my father's goddamn little son of a bitch who was always in the way. Well, I learned through recovery that the reason I was a goddamn little son of a bitch who was always in the way was because my mother put me there to keep my father away from her. She used me for that purpose. It wasn't until I was 13 years old, I slept in the same room my mother slept in. I didn't sleep necessarily with my mom. I don't remember how old I was, but she got a cot that she put on the floor next to her bed that I slept on. And I was just a kid, and I thought that was really neat that I get to sleep with my mom, My dad worked midnights. My uncle lived with us, but my dad worked midnights. And the nights that he was home on his days off and wanted to sleep with my mother, well, you can't sleep. This is my room. I sleep here. Well, of course, you goddamn little son of a bitch. I asked him not. A few years ago, I asked him, I said, why didn't you just tell me to get out of the way? He didn't know how either. And so hopefully our kids are learning how to break that chain that we have taught them now in recovery because they grew up in the program. Our son, gave leads for Alateen. For a long time, he gave leads for Alateen and did all these things. They know the steps inside and out. They could come up and give you a spiel on the 12 steps and backwards. They grew up with that. But they made choices. The youngest one, like I said, she lived in placement. While she was in placement, she learned some new things, what to do. She learned about cutting on herself, and she learned about using this and using that to get high. And she came home, and she did okay for a little while. And then we tried to get her back into school, and the school system sucks, thank you very much. If you have a kid that's in treatment or in placement, and you try to get them back into mainstreamed into school, the schools are very unwilling to cooperate with you. I know that as a parent, and I know that as someone that works in the field who sees parents struggling trying to get their kids mainstream back into school. Schools don't want kids that are problem kids back in the school. Even though they've worked on these things and they come out and they're like, I'm different. I really am different. Give me a chance. No, we only know you how you were, and we're not going to let you in here. Well, she tried to go back to school, and it didn't work out. So she is 5 credits away from having a high school diploma. And this girl took the test twice, and 2 times failed the GED test by 1 point. You know, and I said, well, you know, what's God trying to teach you here? You know, you got to be learning something from all of this. So she's kind of leery about doing it again, but I'm sure that she will. She struggled for a long time when she came home. She struggled for a long time, trying to do what she needed to do. You know, she started using. She started stealing. She started hanging around with kids. I'm still missing my rock watch, thank you very much, that she says she doesn't have, never took, but, you know, I don't know. I lost diamond earrings in recovery. I had diamond earrings that I lost. You know, there's all these different things. She's clean today. She's got a little over a year clean today. And, you know, we're really proud of her for that, because she's really, this time, doing what she needs to do. She was clean for a year before, maybe even 2 years, I'm not sure. She met a guy, and, you know, they hooked up together, and we have a beautiful, beautiful grandson who's 3 and is my heart. And he, you know, teaches her how to be a mom. And she just had a little baby, another baby, 5 months ago. She had a little girl. Her little boy's name is Dylan Jacob, and her little baby girl's name is Ivy Isis, because she wanted to name her, give her a name that's a very powerful woman's name, so she named her Ivy Isis. And she's a beauty. She's a little sweetie too. And we love them. But she struggled for a long time when Dylan was, I don't even think he was 2 yet. And she went back out there, and she left for 4 days. You know, and we were kind of like trying to figure out, what are we doing with Dylan? What are we going to do with this kid? You know, with the grandbaby, what are we going to do? And we had him, you know, and we loved him, and we took care of him, and for 4 days. And then she came back, and you know, she was out there ripping and running again. And she has a story to tell. You know, I hope someday that she has the opportunity to get up somewhere and tell her story, because she's been through a lot herself. We, at one point, this was before Dylan was around, we told her, you know, this is it. You either stop using or get out. You're 18. Stop using or get out. That's your choice. Well, she made the choice to get out. And she went and lived in a crack house, and became the property of whoever was running the crack house. And you know what happens there. And she called and said, Mom, could I come home? She said, I'll do anything that you want me to do if you just let me come home. And having gone through, you know, what she went through years ago for myself, you know, that just brings it all back up again. You know, I said, yeah, you come home. And she did good for a while, like I said, and then she met this guy, and they hooked up. We were at somebody's clean party, and she came and she said, I think I found one, Ma. I said, found one what? Well, you know, like 9 months later, here comes Dylan. But he is a sweetheart. He's the sweetest little thing. And smart as a whip, and he's his pawpaw's working man buddy. And helps me take care of my frog, Sunshine. You know, gotta feed Sunshine, Nana. So they lived with us, and then God sent this angel from heaven, who our youngest daughter is now married to. Got married April 26th. They got married. He knew that she was pregnant with Ivy. He knew that she had Dylan. That's why I said, you know, he's an angel God sent from heaven, and loves them, loves that baby. That baby has his name. loves Dylan. Dylan calls him Daddy. And I said he's the best thing since sliced bread that's happened to Jenny. He's a really good guy. And they had their own place for a while, and then he lost his job, and we said, well, if you want to come back home, come on back home. So they're back with us. And it's like when we were first married and we lived in an apartment and we got kicked out of the apartment and we went back and lived with my mom and dad. It's like deja vu all over again. Would you please do the dishes? Why didn't you do the dishes? Why didn't you straighten up? I can hear my mom's words come right out my mouth to her, all the things. I'll never say that to my kid, There it is. Comes right out. And then you go, oh, shit. And I think, I shouldn't say that, but, there's always that but that comes out. And she says, yeah, but you are saying it. So we have developed a relationship, Jenny and I. She's not only my daughter today she's my friend. And I'm really grateful for that, because her whole life growing up, I would try to hold her or hug her, and she would say, no, don't touch me. And I said, but that's okay. I love you. I'm your mom. No, don't touch me. Stay away. I'm going to help Daddy wash the car. So she asked me not too long ago, and I said, well, you know what? After a while, when someone continually says this, you finally get to the point where you just go, why bother? So I built up that wall with her, to where it was just like, don't even talk to me, kid. And today we have developed that relationship that has gotten better. My son, like I said, he moved back home. He was shooting heroin, started shooting heroin at age 28 because he met this girl. We thought, finally he's going to get in the program. No. He went a couple times and said he does not want to be in NA because that's the program that his mother and father go to, and he's not going to do that. He fights it. So, he's got to do and go through whatever he has to go through. Life has gotten much better for us. It's all blessings from God. It's miracles of the program. If you want to heal the relationship, being a parent with your child, it takes a lot of work. There's a card out there that says, a lasting relationship only takes something or whatever, and it says, not leaving or something like that. And it's the same thing with being a parent. It's one day at a time, just doing the best thing that you know how to do. And like Bernie said, going to meetings and listening to what other people say. Thank you, here it is, secret. The secret to a loving, long-term relationship, don't leave. Whether that's a marriage relationship, we'll be married 31 years in November. Because we worked at it. It ain't all been roses. But just for today, we do the best that we can do, and that's the same thing with being a parent, just for today. You can't beat yourself up for what you did in the past. I can't do that today. All I can do is set boundaries, take responsibility, and say, that's your stuff, not mine. I thank you all for listening to me. Thank you, Bernie, for allowing me to be a part of this. God bless all of you. That's all I have.
We'll